So, Joseph, I know that you've been following, for example, the latest unrest in Kenosha, Wisconsin. That seems to be the latest example of where maybe some legal troubles may be facing the suspect there in that case, Kyle Rittenhouse, the 17-year-old. And right now the debate is about whether or not he was guilty of homicide or whether he was acting in self-defense. So let me ask you, what do you think of, based on what we've seen from the videos that have since come out?
Well, you can't just look at the videos only. You need the backstory because, as you can see with the videos, they give you almost like picture frames that are not in sequence. So, for example, if you just looked at the video, you can't help but ask, well, what started that? And what started those two fighting together? If the start was the defendant in this case, well, that's a much different situation. But if the start was, Latifah or those folks, well, then it makes you look at it differently. So we don't have that in the video. You need that backstory. And we've heard a little bit about what that backstory is from the criminal defense lawyer.
And chronologically speaking, I think you're exactly right. The first video that we have, at least from what authorities are releasing at this point, or at least acknowledging, is Kyle Rittenhouse running away from an individual who ends up throwing something at him, a bag of some sort. And then there's also a gunshot from someone else. So that is prompting Kyle Rittenhouse to then turn and acknowledge the first person that he shot. So that's what we know as of right now. But I want to ask you, too, from a defense perspective, what do they have to prove in that effort? Do they just have to merely prove that his life was in jeopardy to some degree and therefore his response was warranted?
Yes, that's a really good question. Technically, by the law, they don't have to prove a thing. But you and I both know that if they don't, he's going to jail, prison in this case. So what does it really come down to? What story needs to get told? And there's some pieces along the way I'm going to remind you of when I give this to you. The story that has to get told is someone who's actually coming to the defense of another. It's got to be the story of somebody who cares more about others and more about principles than he does his own safety. Is that demonstrated in some of the facts? Yes. For example, the defense would be very key to focus on one moment in time at the very beginning. And in that moment of time, if you look at the picture, you can see a young man, 17 years old, wearing a red backpack. That's his first aid kit. And it's the kind of backpack that is designed to render aid to others, not to just yourself, because of the size and the nature. That gives you an idea as to what he's thinking in the beginning. Is he there to just stir the pot and create chaos and pandemonium, or is he there to contribute and to help? That's a very key moment. One other piece that really helps the defense out and should be focused on is that after the first person is shot, if you notice, he's never running away. He's not looking around to see who can shoot next. He's not trying to conceal. He's not trying to be on offense. He stays there calmly, and his whole emotional intent, as you can see, is to get on the phone and to call for emergency help because he can see this guy's seriously shot. He doesn't probably have the ability, education, or equipment to be able to deal with it. And his whole concern is for somebody who just tried to hurt him. That gives you the picture of his entire emotional content and who he is. Defense do quite well making sure that story gets told because it's the truth.
And of course, the prosecution in this case, like any other case, has the burden of proof of proving that Kyle Rittenhouse in this case intentionally intended to murder someone. And in fact, that's what he's being charged with, first-degree murder. And so when it comes to that as well, the idea of intent, I know it's a very vague idea and it's something that's been litigated now through case law for hundreds of years, but it's something in this case as well as to, is it the intent at the time where he was acknowledging the individual who was coming at him, or is it the intent that he went to Kenosha, he obtained a firearm, and then he ended up killing someone? How big of a window are we looking at when we're looking at the intent of the individual while trying to make the determination of if he committed murder?
Again, these are really good questions, and thank you, because these are insightful. Someone's thought a lot about them. Here's the answer. As a prosecutor, you want to make that window of time as big as possible, because the more intent you can show, the more culpability you can argue, and the greater sentence you get, and the higher risk that you get of conviction. The smaller the window, well, then that gets to be a problem for the prosecution. And in this case, not only do you have the size of the window before the first shooting, but then they get to cut and chop and say, well, okay, if I don't get it on the first one, what about the second one? What about the third one? And so they'll have a lot of opportunity to make arguments and they will try to take snapshots, like freeze frames, and say there's intent right there because he could have done A, B, or C on the alternative. But when you look at it globally, let's be honest, they got a real struggle. And that really begs the question, well, why would they file the government prosecutor if they got such a struggle?
Right. No, and I think that you raise a good point right there, and it's the idea that we're having this conversation oftentimes through the media. And sometimes you don't have to even look at this case in particular, but more so about the precedent that it could set and the facts more broadly of what makes up our whole legal jurisprudence as we have it. So I think too many times emotions are getting involved, and I think in this case right now, it's blurring the facts. And I think that if you take political affiliation out of it, you take out the emotion of it, we have to look at exactly what happened here, because this isn't the first time that a situation like this has happened or will happen again. So getting the law right is very much so important. But Joseph Lowe, I appreciate you coming on the show tonight and breaking down this very important topic. Thank you.